It's hard to find much in the world of digital technology and tech companies that I believe to be solidly beneficial for the normal, everyday person. But crowdfunding, I do think, has some pretty significant upsides. So I've got a couple of different motivations with this video. On the one hand, I have used crowdfunding to launch a kind of side career in illustration, which has pretty rapidly opened doors for me to consider this even as a possible full career. So I want to talk about it in that regard, because I do think the world would be better if more people in the independent creation sphere were able to get their work in front of audiences, connecting with people who would actually enjoy it. So I want more people to know more about crowdfunding as they measure whether or not this is a good route for them to take. And then also, I want you to be aware that I'm currently doing a crowdfunder. So as much as I want this to be helpful, I am also trying to drive traffic that direction so that people will look at the book that I've created. So I put a link down in the description for that, and I'll be talking about it a little bit just as I talk about crowdfunding generally. So hopefully you'll check it out. And when I think about the value of this YouTube channel, what I'm doing with it, what does it do best? It does best when I just kind of relate my own experience in a very honest and forthright way, with the hope that anybody who's looking to do similar things can benefit not by the prescription that I provide of the right way to do things, but just because I will give you, as frankly as possible, what I've tried and what has worked and what has not. So if you're interested at all in eventually trying crowdfunding, this video is very much for you. Crowdfunding is the first way that I tapped into a real readership of paying customers for my graphic novels. It also allowed me to pay for an inventory of my own books at a very high quality. I was able to do hardcovers with sewn binding and to buy 1,000 books outright through the funding that I got from the crowdfunding campaign. From there, it has helped me grow that readership, accumulate funds that have made it more and more viable for me to move towards illustration full-time. And like I said before, that's a leap that I'm just about to take, taking a leave of absence from my job and doing a year of full-time illustration. I'll probably do a video about how I'm planning to pay the bills throughout that. Crowdfunding is a part of it, but not the entire thing. Now I've launched a crowdfunding campaign for my latest book, and it is going better than I expected. I'm never one of those people whose work goes viral, but instead I tend to make solid progress and everything, and this one's going really well by that standard. And so that lets me breathe a sigh of relief a little bit and feel comfortable passing along some of what I have found works and doesn't work in these crowdfunding experiences. And a little disclaimer here, I'm going to mention Kickstarter a lot, but only because that's what I've used to do my 3-volume series. Since the readers are already there, I've continued to use it, but in the future I could branch out into platforms like Fund My Comic, Indiegogo, or anything else that's new. So this is not an endorsement of a singular platform, it's just, again, based upon my experience. This is by no means comprehensive about crowdfunding. I'm just telling you what's happened with me. So first off, the most important thing that I've learned is the flow of a crowdfunding campaign. Crowdfunding, in my experience, and I believe this experience is relatively common, has a kind of half-pipe shape to the income of funds and backers. The first 48 hours and the last 48 hours are most likely to be your highest periods of pledges. After a few days or a week after launch, the pledges will kind of settle down into a trickle. It's kind of this middle area. And then once time starts running out, it starts to pick back up. And then there's a burst in the days and hours right there at the end. This is really important to understand because a lot of what I've learned about crowdfunding comes from learning this chart. The population that you're pulling in the beginning and in the middle and in the end are mostly 3 different audiences, even if slightly different. And the way you reach out to each of those requires a strategy. I did not know any of this when I did my first campaign, so when the pledges started to dry up in that middle phase, I thought it was going to fail. And I passed the mark for, I think that one was $8,400 and funds right before the end of the campaign. It was very stressful. So let's talk about the first audience, the audience who shows up in the first 48 hours. Dominantly, these are the people that you bring with you. Your audience. That means that you have been working to accumulate that audience for some time. The way I handled this initially is really messy because I was more or less throwing spaghetti at the wall. I didn't know what platforms to use. I didn't know how to reach out to people, any of that. But at this stage, my combined opening audience consists of a few different things. One of them are the people who read the webcomic version of my graphic novel Theseus. There's the people who read the webtoon version of it. And there's the people who have subscribed to my Substack. And that's the best audience because that's the one that reaches out into their email inbox directly, which is still a very effective way to reach people. And then there's the people who follow me on Twitter. And I know it's called X, but that just doesn't roll off the tongue very well. So I'm going to continue calling it Twitter for the sake of my euphonic desires. More than a year before I did my first crowdfunder, I started posting pages twice a week on a personal website, which was theseuscomic.com. I listed the comic on all the webcomic databases, even though, honestly, webcomics were kind of on the decline at that point. They were getting replaced by Webtoon and similar. Then social media following, friends, and family were the other thing that I used. Personally, I really don't like relying on friends and family. I always feel a bit guilty about that. I'd much rather get books into the hands of people who are just interested in the book, because I know that what we choose for entertainment is largely a matter of taste. But if you've got people around you who care about you, they will show up, and that's something to appreciate on principle, and I am extremely appreciative of those who have helped me out in that way. So it boils down to this really basic, simple set of tips for this first audience. You have to deliberately build an audience through some kind of social media. Don't focus just on numbers. Focus on the quality of your followers. People who are interested in your kind of work and are reliable participants who will sometimes spend money on your wares. And really, this is a kind of slow building of a social media audience. Going viral just doesn't give you as much clout as you would think. It's more of the slowly accumulated quality mutuals and followers who give social media whatever value that it has, which is frequently debatable, but certainly I have gotten a lot of connections on social media of people who were genuinely interested in my work and have been repeat customers for me, and I'm extremely grateful for that. Don't try to put yourself on every single platform. All of them have strengths and all of them are terrible in some way or another. Just pick a couple of them and commit to building an audience right there. You will absolutely exhaust yourself if you do too many, and that's one of the mistakes that I made early on. I tried to be everywhere because I didn't know which of them would take off. But really what takes off is where you're kind of putting time, and you don't want to spend all of your time on social media platforms trying to cultivate an audience everywhere. It's not very effective. You'll do much better if you focus in on one or two. One of the keys, I think, to social media, to accumulating that kind of follower as opposed to kind of searching out viral posts and things, is honestly demonstrating your work. Talk about process, show the way in which you create the work that you're making. Don't feel a need to advertise all over the place or to put out these very formal or corporate looking boost or ads for your work. One of the benefits of purchasing indie work is that there's typically a real human behind it, and it's not a major corporation. That's a large reason why people go in the direction of indie work when they're looking for entertainment. They want that human aspect. So on social media, try to be human as much as you can. Most crowdfunding platforms will have a pre-launch page of some kind. Kickstarter definitely has this, and I've used it. It is a Kickstarter staple. It allows you to kind of accumulate followers for the actual project who get emailed when it launches. So again, something that goes directly into their inbox. That is by far the most effective thing, and the pre-launch page is really helpful. So one of the things that I do early is I make sure to get that project approved by Kickstarter with plenty of time before I'm going to launch it. And then I boost that link. I talk about my work. I put the link up there so that people who are interested in it can sign up to be notified as soon as it launches. And that really does help with that first 48 hours of pledges. In general, it's best to launch a crowdfunding campaign on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday before lunch. I know that sounds kind of oddly specific, but it really does give you your best chance of people seeing it early on. Launching at night or on a weekend will drop your reach on those crucial days, and I know this because the first crowdfunder I did, I launched it at midnight for some reason. I don't know why I thought that would be a good idea. I guess I didn't think about it nearly enough. But I launched it at midnight, so the first pledges were coming in the wee hours of the morning. I absolutely think that reduced the number that I got there because most people didn't see it until the following morning. By that time, you've wasted 8 or 9 hours of crucial attention time because most of the time, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, that's when people are not wanting to work and they're looking at the internet. Sad but true. It's one reason why there's less traffic on weekends and holidays. So be aware of that. Most of your first 2 to 3 days will be people who already know your work and they already are familiar with you. If you bring them in force early, it helps grant the campaign legitimacy for new people who stumble onto your work from the crowdfunding site. And we'll talk more about that audience here in a bit. You'll hear people say pretty often that you have to make at least 50% of your funding goal in the first 48 hours in order for the campaign to fund in full. And while that is not set in stone, my first campaign, for example, only made 18% of the funding goal in the first 48 hours. And it did fund at the end. It's still not a bad rule of thumb to kind of give you a metric for how you're looking. Just don't panic if it doesn't make it all the way to 50% in those first 2 days. And also remember that crowdfunding accumulates results on repeat campaigns. So Theseus Volume 1 earned 1,575 in its first 48 hours. Theseus Volume 2 earned 5,368 during that same time. And that meant that people liked it and they came back. And that made me feel great. That's what you want. But Kickstarter in particular emails people when someone they've backed before does a new project. So it helps you bring those people back for repeat campaigns. I find that really helpful, and it shows you in your stats how many people came from that particular link. A repeat backer who got notified because they had backed you before. And it's a pretty substantial number. So Theseus Volume 2 made over 5,000 in the first 2 days. Theseus Volume 3 made over 10,000 in the first 48. And that is the majority of what I've made on that one. There's still about 10 days left in that campaign, and I just broke 16,000. You have a real potential to build audience and to have that audience come back looking for more of what you made for them. And the next thing that I'll be figuring out is whether or not people want to come back for a completely different title, because this is the end of the Theseus series. So we'll see how it goes when I switch to another title, either later this year or beginning of next year. Now let's talk about that middle period, because after we decline from the opening, you enter this frustratingly slow period in the middle. And this is one reason why it's a good idea to resist the temptation to make a campaign longer than 30 days. I really grappled with that when I did my first campaign, because you have this fear in the back of your mind that says, well, what if I don't have enough time to get all the money that I need? Which is a very real fear. But because it has this half-pipe system where we go down in those first 3-4 days, maybe a week, and then you hit this really slow period. You're putting additional days in the wilderness right in the middle of your campaign. This is one reason why I increasingly favor cutting the number down to 24 or 21 days. You actually lose very little that way. It still gives you enough time to attract new readers without extending it longer than it needs to be, which can have downsides that I'll talk about a little bit later. Right now, Theseus Volume 3 just hit its dry period. I'm getting just a handful of backers each day, if that. And that's even with this being a finished series where you can get all of the books together, which in my mind is kind of the most likely to attract new backers in the middle. But nonetheless, it's still just a dry period. That's kind of the nature of the beast. So the middle area is always going to be a bit slower, and it's mostly going to be new readers. But that middle audience is going to be what keeps you going through the dry days. And they are a unique group because most of them are crowdfunding hobbyists. So these are people who back a lot of campaigns. They spend their discretionary income on a lot of different crowdfunding things. So they like work that's made by independent people. It's a really good audience, and it's the ones who dominantly find you on the platform because they're already on the platform. I learned this the hard way when I tried to run ads across a lot of different social media sites on my first couple of campaigns, because I tried running ads on Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and Google and posting them even on some dedicated websites, buying ad space on dedicated websites. The ads generated very little income, and generally I lost money on them. Typically the best case scenario was breaking even. And I think the main reason for this is because unless you're a crowdfunder, you don't really get the system. So I think the best thing to do is to try and keep the algorithms noticing that your campaign is active, so that they will push you up in the rankings for whatever your category is on the crowdfunding platform. A few things help with that, and again, my experience was with Kickstarter, so this may or may not apply to other platforms, but having solid opening days helps increase the legitimacy of your project, because when people see it in the listings, they know that other people have already trusted you. Crowdfunding always carries a kind of risk for backers, and trust really does matter. Spend a lot of time building your graphics and fashioning your campaign. If it looks like you put a lot of work into it, backers are more likely to assume that you care and that you put that same kind of care into the project itself. You really do need to have a strong visual pitch and hook, as well as one that's written that describes your project very well. These are very hard to write, but it is valuable to go through that process. I don't think I'm particularly good at it, but I do try very hard to offer as clear and concise a pitch as possible at the start. And don't write it with AI. People can spot that stuff way too easily now. I've already been inundated with so much of it, it sticks out like a sore thumb when I encounter it. And that writing that you get from an AI is the very epitome of nothing special. So write it yourself and keep the humanity, even if a little bit of the roughness stays in there. Okay, so here's the pitch that I put right at the beginning of my current one. I'll let you evaluate whether or not you think this works. For 6 years, I've worked on completing this enormous 3-volume series telling the story of Theseus, ancient Greek hero and legendary Minotaur fighter. I've taken the narrative of his life directly from the ancient writings of Plutarch and spun it into a colorful, fully illustrated coming-of-age adventure, both sincere and humorous. That's the pitch. So, does that work? I hope so. But I'm trying to give you the best strengths of it I can, and I'm trying to write it in my own voice. And hopefully, when people come along and see that at the top, that's enough to at least get them interested so that they'll continue looking. Because this isn't really the call to action yet. The call to action here is just to continue looking. And so if I can catch them with that, hopefully they'll keep looking through, and I can build the case through the rest of the graphics that I provide and the rest of the information that I provide, so that there's a possibility that they'll be willing to invest their hard-earned money into something that I've made. Another way you can kind of help raise the profile of your project on the listings of most crowdfunding platforms, again, particularly Kickstarter, is to respond to comments People will leave comments on the campaign. They'll ask questions, respond to those, be personable, be helpful, post updates on how the campaign is going for your entire audience. In those cases, be gracious and thankful. Offer stretch goals when it's appropriate as you get towards the end of your campaign. I think because that is a way of thinking about how to provide an even better value for your reward tiers. Do make a campaign video, even if it's really simple. Mine are usually just me and some graphics, just kind of giving the pitch in another form. But I did take the time to make that pitch, and not everyone does. So if there's an opportunity where not everyone does this kind of simple thing, then I'm going to go ahead and do that simple thing just to try and raise the profile a little bit more. Do offer some big ticket reward tiers. Crowdfunders tend to be collectors. They value specialty items and extras and things that have a personal touch from the author. And that really benefits those of us who are creating the works. So I offer higher price tiers with original sketches, and they always do well. I sold out of all of them this time. I offered a total of 40 sketches over this campaign, and I sold out of all of them very quickly. Then on social media, do keep making your pitch. Don't get discouraged by the slow pace. That's kind of the nature of the medium, and pitching your work over and over again does help. Don't worry too much about gimmicks. Just stress the value of what you're making. See, I really believe that my Theseus graphic novel, which is quite silly in its manifestation, it's funny. It retells the myth and it's humorous, but I think of it as a way of introducing mythology to people who don't often read it. If somebody knows the mythology well, I think they'll still appreciate it. I even hide little extra jokes in ancient Greek in the background for those who are deeply schooled in it. But if you don't know anything about it, then I think it's a great opening by which people can learn about it. So I believe with conviction in the thing that I'm doing. And so when I talk about it on social media, I don't just boost it. I don't just try to make the case that because it's independent, you ought to back it. I think that's one of the benefits, but that's not the reason. I'm trying to offer something of real value to the people who read it, and I stick to that conviction because I have faith in what I've made, and I think all of us, if we're going to make something, we ought to have faith in the things that we make. Now, for that final section of the crowdfunder, over the course of the campaign, you accumulate followers. And usually in a campaign, I'll pick up about 200 to 300 followers who have come through and they've seen the campaign. And maybe they liked my pitch. It was enough to interest them, but not enough to commit them. And so they'll hit that little follow button. And these are the people who are not sure if they want to pursue it or not. And most of these are still that crowdfunding hobbyist crowd. Very much like the middle crowd, but you haven't closed the deal yet. And you haven't lost them either. So there's a bright side to that. Automatically, in those last few days, Kickstarter does this. It'll send out emails to them informing them that time is almost up. Those emails and notices do most of the work, but one of the things that you can do is post updates that show either what stretch goals you've added, which increase the value of your reward tiers, or talk about the final process in some aspect of the project. In this case, I have a slipcase that I'm having designed to hold all 3 books. And so I'm getting samples of both the book and the slipcase shipped to me right now. They're being produced and shipped to me. Right at the end of the campaign, I should have them on hand to post updates with images of them to try and make one last case that this is a good quality object and it's something that people will legitimately enjoy and it looks good in physical condition. So little things like that, plus the stretch goals that I've already put on, hopefully that makes a little more case for that final ending crowd. And you should also just be on guard for those last few days. Be very active. Questions and comments will likely pop up, and you've got to be very active in responding. Make it look like it's still lively at the end of it, that you're still present. And that helps increase the energy and the enthusiasm because people see you and they see you as being enthusiastic, and that helps encourage them that, again, you really care about this. Also, one of the decisions that you made at the beginning of the campaign will come back to either reward or haunt you at this stage. Your campaign will end, at least on Kickstarter, again, at the same time it began. So starting a campaign around 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. is really good timing. That provides both a strong start and a strong ending. But like a moron, I forgot about this and I launched the current campaign at 8 a.m. And so that one's going to cost me a little bit in the end. Nothing terrible, but I will certainly have less dollars than I would have had I just remembered this before launching the campaign. Now, after finishing a Kickstarter campaign, if it successfully funds, it tries to build a credit card of everyone who has pledged. A number of the cards, usually less than 5%, will get kicked back because of some error. Either the card is expired or the number wasn't entered properly, something. So just be aware you will never get as much money as your final number claims. Kickstarter gives them a certain amount of time, usually a couple of weeks, to fix it, but some of them won't, and the pledges will fail. And then it'll be about 2 weeks before Kickstarter actually turns over the money, and that's kind of important to know because it helps you plan for when you will spend it. Because I work with a printer, and getting them the money for the final print is always an open question as to when exactly that happens. So knowing about that 2 weeks is really helpful. Now let's talk about some general tips. General tips for crowdfunding. One of them is shipping. There's two basic approaches to shipping. One of them is to use a system like BackerKit, which does not include the shipping cost in the backer's pledge. Instead, after the campaign, all the backers get emailed and you have to pay a second time for the shipping, usually having no idea what the shipping cost will be. I absolutely hate this. I won't back campaigns that do this anymore. I did so a couple of times, and once the amount of shipping was more than the book that I had pledged for on a domestic order. So I gave up the book and I just didn't pay the shipping. It's just lost money, and I will never back from that crowdfunder again. I want my backers to know what they are paying as much as that is in my power. So I use ShipStation to check the shipping prices, factor in my boxes and my packaging, and I set rates for the top countries, which for me is always the US, the UK, Australia, and Canada. Everything else I set as a standard rate based upon a reasonable guess. Give yourself some buffer room, though. Shipping prices can easily go up, so try not to cut it to the exact dollar. Give yourself a little bit more room, at least $2 or $3 more. It takes some practice to get it right, and I have definitely lost a little bit of money on shipping in the past, particularly international. That's really where the guesswork comes in. The domestic stuff in the US is pretty easy to predict, so that one is very, very close to accurate. This also changes how you calculate the amount that you need for the whole campaign. What is the number that you actually need to raise? This is how I calculate that. In this campaign, for example, Theseus Volume 3, I'm printing fewer books because it's the third book and I need to match the existing stock that I have for Volume 1 and 2 so that I can sell sets, and then have enough left for the repeat readers who already have copies of 1 and 2. So my estimate here was about 500 copies. So I got a quote from a printer which came back just under $4,000 for the hardcover copies, all told. I'm also ordering 500 slipcases, and based upon the projection from the printer, we're looking about $1,500 with a little bit of buffer baked in. You should always assume a little bit more than you actually need, otherwise you can lose money. And so that brings me to about $5,500 in case your arithmetic is weak. Each platform is going to take a percentage. In total fees, Kickstarter takes about 10%. Shipping costs usually run about 20% of your total if you're including them in the campaign, which I absolutely am. So I multiplied $5,500 by 1.3, and I got $7,150. So I made the number for the campaign $7,200 to make sure that I had enough money to pay for the printing, the shipping of all the pledges that paid for the printing, plus the additional fees for Kickstarter. So that covers everything and leaves me a little bit of buffer room. And I know that anything above that, I then am either reinvesting back into the business or paying bills or using it to add stretch goals so that I increase the value of things. And of course, I'm doing a little bit of all that. Now, admittedly, this is a little loosey-goosey. I would be as specific as possible on a campaign where there were more unknowns. I'd work in a budget for things like advertising, other rewards, and maybe a little bit more buffer. If I'm having stickers printed or I'm making keychains or a little Theseus bobblehead, which I've thought about in the past. But this being the third campaign, I felt pretty confident that if it made, it would go very well. And if not, I could still fund the remainder using existing book sales money and then sell my existing stock later at comic conferences to make up the difference. So I felt pretty safe about this one in general, and that's one of the benefits too of doing repeat campaigns is you tend to get a much more ambiguous plan and outcome with the first one, but then as you do more, it becomes increasingly predictable so that you can count on it a little more. Some additional tips, as I mentioned before, the 30 days is really too long, and one of the problems with it is you will lose backers along the way who rethink their pledge, often towards the end of the campaign. If you shorten the campaign, there's usually less of these. Again, the beginning and the end are hot spots, and unless you have a great strategy for the middle, there's not much benefit to having those extra days. And in general, I would prefer not to make it so long that people end up with buyer's remorse or they lose interest or something like that. I would rather you get excited about it, buy it, and get the very good product that fulfills that in a reasonable amount of time. So if I can shorten it a little bit, I will. The Project We Love designation on Kickstarter is very helpful, but it is not at all necessary. It's most helpful on a first campaign. I haven't gotten it for my last two campaigns. Kickstarter no longer loves my projects. It makes me sad not to be loved, but mostly where that is effective is in that slow middle because it boosts you in the rankings and helps people find you. So it's most useful in the middle, but it's not a deal breaker if the platform just decides not to notice you. Definitely don't anticipate virality. Focus on getting solid, acceptable results. It's a genuine privilege to have people pay you for your work. Appreciate it and don't worry if it doesn't just take off like mad. Failure and crazy viral success are not the only options. And so I personally have always lived in the functional, solid middle. And to be honest, I think that's really where we ought to be shooting, because if you're going to grow, you do it from that platform. I'm glad that I didn't have crazy success early because I probably would have mucked things up to a certain degree. So I would rather build it slowly, mature, learn how to do this, and so that's a good thing to shoot for. Certainly it's not just those binary ends of failure and viral success. Keep your tiers relatively simple, having a spread of lower cost tiers and then some high cost tiers, as I mentioned before, and then something good and solid in the middle. That's your bread and butter. Too many little rewards can become a nightmare during fulfillment and increase the risk of delays. And in my experience, some people do want to get those high tiers, but you don't need a huge amount of them. It's not a tremendous number. But the majority of people are going to kind of look in the middle for not the lowest tier, not the highest one, but something Goldilocksy in the middle. And so I always want to have an option there that's really good and is a good value for the money that I'm asking. Speaking of delays, the most important warning that I can give is to finish your project or get really, really close to doing so before you start the crowdfunding campaign. I believe it is a terrible idea to fund just an idea. Ideas notoriously take more time to produce than you anticipate. Funding a book printing is a much lower cost and a lower risk proposition than funding yourself on the production of a book. Get it finished or very nearly finished. There are plenty of horror stories about failed fulfillments. Don't become one of them. It destroys the reputation that you're trying to build, and your backers deserve to have their faith rewarded when they commit money to your work. This matters a great deal to me. If you have other questions about crowdfunding, feel free to leave a comment and I'll answer as much as my experience allows in specifics. I try to be a little bit more general with this because the platforms vary depending on where you are. But if you have questions about things like how I do shipping, how I calculate fulfillment times, anything that could be nuts and bolts, I'd be glad to accumulate a number of those questions and then kind of give some additional feedback. Again, just based upon my experience. I can't apply it universally, but I can tell you what I've done. And I'm sure you can find other people on here who have done this kind of thing, who will at least talk about it to a certain degree. Never count too much on the views of a single person, even somebody with an infinitely trustworthy face like me. So that's everything. I'm happy to follow up with another video if people do have questions, but if this was enough for you, I hope you gleaned something from it, and I hope you have a lovely Paschal week.